It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Just me, my truck, and the cabin I had built with my own hands nearly 20 years ago. Nestled against the edge of Lake Arrowhead, the cabin sat under a thick canopy of pine and cedar, facing the still blue waters I knew better than my own reflection. I hadn't been out here in months' business expansions, city meetings, and, ironically, dealing with HOA zoning projects had kept me tied up. But this weekend was mine. I pulled up just before sunset on Friday, dust kicking up behind the wheels of my Ford F250. I parked in my usual spotter-flat gravel patch right in front of the porch, just off the main loop. The engine was barely off before I spotted her. Blonde bob, stiff walk, clipboard in one hand, and a scowl permanently carved into her face like granite. Karen. Every neighborhood had one. And apparently, this slice of lakefront heaven wasn't immune. She zeroed in on my truck like a missile. I hadn't even grabbed my bags yet when she started across the grass, determined and steaming like a kettle about to blow. "Excuse me," she barked before I could say a word. "You can't park here." I raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure I can. This is my cabin." She pointed sharply at a sign nailed to a nearby pine. "This entire road is part of Clearwater Shores HOA. Parking regulations are clearly stated in the handbook. No overnight parking on shared access loops without board approval." I looked around. The loop she was referring to was a narrow gravel ring with 2 cabins on either end, one of which was mine. The other? From the looks of it, an Airbnb filled with tourists who hadn't even bothered to pick up their trash from the porch. "This isn't shared access," I said calmly. "That spot's part of my property. I built this cabin. I developed this entire section." Karen crossed her arms. "That's impossible. I've been the HOA president for 3 years, and I've never heard of you." I smiled, not out of amusement, but pity. I sold this land in phases 15 years ago to fund the rest of the neighborhood build-out. This entire community, every loop, every cabin, every meter of gravel used to be part of my ranch. She stared at me like I had just claimed I invented the internet. "That can't be true. All land here is subject to HOA code. If you live here, you follow our rules." I chuckled. "I don't live here. I own this cabin. It predates the HOA, and legally, this parcel was never incorporated into your covenant." Her nostrils flared. "Then we'll see what the sheriff has to say about that."
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
"Then we'll see what the sheriff has to say about that." I watched in mild disbelief as she pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right in front of me over a parking spot on private property. As she marched away to meet the imaginary cavalry, I grabbed my gear, unlocked the door, and stepped inside the cabin. Same creaky hinges. Same cedar smell. Same memories in every plank and beam. I poured a drink and waited. 20 minutes later, the sound of tires crunching gravel signaled the arrival of the local sheriff's deputy. A guy named Miller. I knew him from town meetings. Stand-up guy. Karen nearly threw herself in front of his cruiser, waving her hands and pointing at my truck like it was a crime scene. Miller stepped out slowly, hands on his belt, and listened as she rattled off some dramatic spiel about unauthorized vehicle encroachment and threats to community harmony. He finally held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Whose truck is it?" She pointed. His. I stepped onto the porch with my glass in hand. "Evening, Sheriff." He looked at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, that's Mr. Walker. He's not only the legal owner of this cabin he developed this side of the lake. Half of Clearwater Shores wouldn't exist without his land sales." Karen blinked. "That can't be true." "The registry is in the county archives," Miller said calmly. "And I've seen it. He's exempt from your HOA boundaries. Always has been." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. then opened again like a fish gasping for air. Well, maybe he was the owner, but the HOA has rights. If he sold the land, he's still subject to Miller raised a hand again. No, man. He retained this lot outside the plat when he sold. This cabin is grandfathered. You can't touch him. I could see the storm brewing in her eyes. She had been so used to being the sheriff of this little fiefdom, stomping around with her clipboard and doling out citations like a mall cop with a god complex. But her badge didn't work out here. Not with me. She turned to me. You think you're above the law just because you built a few cabins? I smiled slowly. No, Karen. I just know the law better than you do. That's the difference. She stormed off, muttering something about bylaws and legal complaints. Miller tipped his hat and walked back to his cruiser. She's going to file something, you know, he said. I nodded. Let her try. Everything she sends gets returned with the original plat maps, signed by the county commissioner. He smirked. Just don't park on her lawn next time. I laughed and went back inside. The next morning, the drama kicked up a level. I woke up to find yellow HOA violation tape strung across my driveway like some kind of crime scene. There was a bright pink notice taped to my porch railing stating that my cabin was officially out of compliance and was being referred for enforcement escalation. I had to give it to Karen. She had guts. No legal ground, no jurisdiction, but full-on delusion. I snapped a photo, tore the tape down, and called my attorney. Charles Bingham. Big-time real estate litigator. Handled all my development contracts. Within the hour, he had already drafted a cease and desist and personally emailed it to the HOA board's generic Gmail address. He also filed a complaint with the County Zoning Commission, attaching original plats, exemption records, and proof that my property had been legally detached from the HOA overlay since the beginning. That should have ended it. But Karen didn't know when to...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
That should have ended it. But Karen didn't know when to quit. She started rallying her little HOA inner circle, passing out flyers claiming I was threatening neighborhood peace and violating environmental codes. She claimed my cabin was damaging the shoreline, even though the EPA had already cleared it years ago. She told neighbors I was bringing in unapproved guests, despite the fact I hadn't had a single visitor since arriving. It was all noise, but loud noise spreads fast. Some residents started giving me odd looks. A few whispered near the boat dock. I heard one guy ask if I was the builder who got sued by the HOA. That's when I knew Karen had turned this into a full-blown campaign. So I responded the only way I knew how, with truth and receipts. I went to town and paid for a full-page ad in the local paper. I laid out the original land deed, the exemptions, the development history, the county commissioner's signed letter, and photos of Karen taping false notices to my cabin. The headline was simple. When HOA power goes too far, a warning to Clearwater Shores. It spread like wildfire. I uploaded the digital version to the community Facebook page. Neighbors who had kept quiet started speaking up. One couple revealed Karen had fined them $250 for having wind chimes. Another family said she ordered them to repaint their door 3 times in one season. Karen's illusion of control began to crack. And I wasn't done. By Sunday, I held a barbecue. Open invite. No HOA approval needed. I printed out copies of the original developer maps and handed them out with burgers and hot dogs. I told people the real story: how I'd cleared the land, poured the gravel roads, planted the first trees, and built the first cabins. How the HOA had only been created after I sold the secondary lots, and how my cabin had never, ever been under its thumb. People started laughing. One guy even said, Karen thought she was bossing around the guy who made the neighborhood. Her reputation melted faster than the ice in my cooler. But Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. That night, she showed up with a private security guard, yes, Reliant tried to hand-deliver a final warning for non-compliance. I stood on the porch, arms folded, while she shouted about jurisdiction, authority, and the sanctity of community standards. I didn't say a word, just held up a laminated copy of the original county plaque map. When she finished her rant, the guard clearly uncomfortable looked at the paperwork, then at Karen. "Ma'am?" he said awkwardly. "This document says he's not under HOA control." Karen snatched the paper and stormed off again. That was the last time she set foot near my cabin. Or so I thought. Karen's last visit with the security guard was supposed to be her grand moment, the confrontation where she re-established dominance, forced me off my own property, and proved to the neighborhood that her authority still held weight. But what actually happened was a disaster. Her guard refused to act, her so-called final notice was null and void, and my laminated plat map had more legal weight than anything she could muster. The next day, her tantrum became legend. One of my neighbors, a retired firefighter named Bill, had captured part of it on his doorbell camera. He sent me the footage, and I uploaded it with permission to the local neighborhood watch group on Facebook. In the video, Karen's voice cracked as she screamed about HOA supremacy while pointing wildly at my cabin. The clip went viral. Not global viral, but enough to spread across 5 local counties, 2 HOA discussion forums, and a subreddit called r/HOA Hell. People were tagging their friends, commenting with popcorn emojis, and quoting her infamous line, "You can't ignore my authority just because you built the neighborhood." It was over. She just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, I received a letter from the county courthouse. Karen had officially filed a civil complaint against me for repeated disregard of neighborhood standards, AES, disruption of public order, and threatening the integrity of Clearwater Shore's HOA governance. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. The fact that she was willing to take this to court told me one thing. She had either completely lost her grip on reality or had convinced herself that if she just shouted loud enough, the law would bend. My lawyer, Charles Bingham, barely blinked. "We'll crush this," he said, confidently sipping his espresso as he reviewed the paperwork. "Not only is her claim baseless, but we're going to countersue for harassment, trespassing, and abuse of power under false authority." The court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Charles had me document everything. Photos, video, letters, timestamps, emails, and yes, even Karen's bizarre social media posts accusing me of waging psychological warfare with a parole. Truck. We built a folder thicker than the HOA handbook itself. Charles also reached out to several other residents who'd been Karen's targets over the years. They agreed to testify. Apparently, my story had inspired them to stand up too. When the day finally came, the courtroom was packed. Not with press, but with neighbors. Dozens of them. Some came with folded papers and notes, ready to speak. Others just wanted to see Karen's long-running power trip come to an end. She arrived in her signature burnt orange blazer, face tight with anticipation, like she believed the judge was going to give her a trophy. She brought no attorney just. A giant binder labeled HOA, Truth, in red Sharpie. I arrived in jeans and a blazer. Calm, confident. Charles was already in place, thumbing through our mountain of documents. The Juja no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench called the case. Karen went first. She spoke for 20 minutes. Rambling, pointing, ranting. She claimed I was inciting rebellion, refusing to comply with neighborhood peace initiatives, and undermining civic order. At one point, she held up a blurry photo of my truck, circled in red marker. "This vehicle," she declared, "has been parked here for 3 consecutive days without proper permits." The judge stared. "On his own land?" Karen sputtered. But the HOA has rules." Then...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
But the HOA has rules." Then Charles stood up. In under 10 minutes, he dismantled her entire case. He presented the original plat exemption, the exemption letter from the county, the dated video of Karen crossing into my property and taping fake violations. He handed over the neighbor testimonials, the cease and desist letter, and the video of her making wild accusations in front of the private security guard. Karen's face got redder by the minute. Then Charles calmly added, "Your Honor, we are countersuing for harassment, civil trespass, false claims, and emotional distress. We also have grounds for malicious prosecution, given the baseless nature of this complaint." The judge didn't even deliberate long. She ruled the HOA had no jurisdiction over my land, dismissed Karen's complaint with prejudice, and allowed our countersuit to proceed. Karen's mouth dropped. "But I'm the HOA president," she exclaimed one last time. The judge didn't blink. Not for long, I imagine. The fallout was swift and brutal. The local paper ran a headline the next day. HOA president loses lawsuit to developer she tried to evict. People started pulling out of Karen's circle faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her from office. She refused to step down until a recall petition gathered enough signatures in 2 days flat. They held a vote. 93% wanted her gone. Her car was egged. Someone planted plastic flamingos in her yard with tiny signs that read, "HOA Goddess No More." Karen put her house up for sale the following week. It sat on the market for 2 months before someone finally bought it after, slashing the price by nearly 100 grand. I heard she moved 2 counties over and joined another HOA. But I wasn't finished. I didn't just want Karen out, I wanted to fix the entire system. I'd spent years building Clearwater from dirt roads and tree stumps. I knew what it could be, and I'd seen what it had become under unchecked HOA power. So I ran for the board. No one opposed me. Not a single soul. In the very meeting where Karen's chair sat empty, I was voted in as the new board president. The irony didn't escape me. The man Karen tried to evict was now in charge of everything she thought she owned. My first move? I rewrote the bylaws. I included military exemption clauses, made wind chimes legal, banned clipboard harassment, instituted mandatory transparency for all board communications. I launched a website where residents could anonymously report board abuse without fear of retaliation. I slashed unnecessary dues, refunded illegal fines from Karen's tenure, and created a neighborhood newsletter that celebrated actual community news births, events, fishing tournaments, not just a list of who had the wrong color mailbox. People thanked me. Real change swept through Clearwater. The place began to feel like a community again, not a kingdom. And the cabin? I kept visiting. Every weekend I could. I'd sit on the porch and watch the sun dip behind the lake, the glassy surface reflecting orange and gold. I parked wherever I wanted. Because I could. Because I had earned it. Because I built it. So when people ask about the day Karen called 911 over a truck in a gravel spot, I smile. When they ask what happened to her and her authority, I just say, she forgot where she was standing. She thought she was the law. But I was the land. And in Clearwater, the land always wins.